We're starting at 7, even though we're going to start momentarily. If you see them, will you just flag them that you've got a seat near you as they walk into the room? Thank you. Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Rabbi Sharon Brous. I'm absolutely thrilled to be with all of you this evening for this incredible event. Before we start, I just want to say a word about the space that we're in right now. Can I just see if this is your first time in our space here? Great, welcome. Okay, this is just a little small sliver of land that we purchased, that the IKAR community purchased several years ago, and already we're using this as a home for the IKAR community. We're going to be praying in this room on Friday night. We're here. We love using the space for events like this. And we're going to be developing, in the course of the not-too-distant future, this into a full home for our community and a platform for multi-faith justice work, for democracy and civic engagement, a place for people to come together and share differences of opinion, to share our big dreams of what's possible in this city, in this country, and in the world. So we're absolutely thrilled to have you all here in this space tonight. And we have been dreaming about and working toward this night since... Okay. Unless you are a customer of the hourly motel next door... Raise your hand. Apparently, we're not supposed to have our cars in there, so if you parked there, I would recommend for many reasons that you move it. Apparently, there is a giant parking lot right at the end at 18th Street that you can park on, and hopefully there's some neighborhood parking. Okay, nobody's getting up. All right. Okay, so... Oh, you could just pay for the hour, and then you'll have a right to be there. Okay, thank you. We're off to a great start. Okay, we need the laughter, we need the joy. Okay, so... I'm so excited to introduce Maoz, Inon, and Aziz Abu Sara to all of you this evening. I met Aziz Abu Sara last summer when we were in Aspen together, and I heard him speak, and I have to say this was a session that was so packed with people that they were literally physically blocking people from coming into the room, and I was so moved that so many people got to hear your incredible voice, and immediately came up to you afterwards and said, we just need you at IKAR. Los Angeles needs you. Our community needs you. When can we have you come and speak? At that time, Aziz told me about his dear partner, Maoz, Inon, and friend in the work. And I have been very blessed to be able to connect with Maoz, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that as they come up here. But our dream for this evening was to bring together not only people from the IKAR community, but really from across the communities of Los Angeles, so that you could hear from these two peace builders who are really at the helm of a newly invigorated peace movement. And we're going to talk tonight about what it means to be so bold as to speak of peace in times like this. But I want to invite Maoz and Aziz to come forward and take your seats so that I can introduce you formally.
Let's try not to fall.
We start with the physical challenge, okay? Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, this is tricky stuff.
Okay.
Okay, no injuries. Okay.
I think it's our last.
So let me start by just first of all thanking all of our co-sponsors. You okay? Okay, I'm going to thank Beth Shir Shalom, the Jewish Narrative Project, J Street, the New Israel Fund, Repair the World, and Temple Israel of Hollywood. And I see my dear colleague, Rabbi Michelle Masagia, right here in the front row, for co-sponsoring this evening, and all of you, from whichever points of connection you come, we're grateful that you're here. Let me give a very brief intro to who these two wondrous people are. What? And Camp Gilboa. Okay. So I'm gonna I'm just going to share briefly because I would like for them to tell you their stories themselves. Maoz Inon is an Israeli peace entrepreneur and a father of 3. As many of you know, both of Maoz's parents were murdered on October 7th. And since that time, he has become one of the most important voices for peace between Israelis and Palestinians. They have been speaking together, Maoz and Aziz, from the halls of Congress to universities to businesses to a whole wide spectrum of organizations and NGOs. And their message is that peace is possible. Aziz Abu Sarah is a Palestinian peace builder, an author, and a mission-driven entrepreneur whose personal story of transformation began after the tragic loss of his brother, who was killed by Israeli soldiers. From seeking revenge to championing peace, Aziz has dedicated his life to advancing reconciliation through innovative initiatives in Palestine, Israel, and over 60 other countries. Aziz has been recognized as among the 500 most influential Muslims in the whole world, and there are a lot of Muslims in the world, many more than there are Jews. Annually, annually, you didn't just make the list once, okay? For 15 years.
They haven't found other people.
And the two of them actually gave a TED Talk together, which I suspect that many people in this room heard and which we will talk about, which came out within the year since October 7th in the midst of a devastating war, and found the courage not only to travel around the world, but to sit on stage with millions of people watching and talk about the possibility of peace. Aziz, Maoz, it is an absolute honor and pleasure to have you here with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I have heard the two of you say that the bigger the crisis, the bigger the opportunity. So that's the good news, because we could not be in a bigger crisis than we are in right now, which means that we have incredible potential for something transformative to happen. I want to start by talking about your stories. For both of you, your peace work and your commitment to a different kind of future has grown out of your own life experiences. I just mentioned them very briefly. But for both of you, these are stories of loss and heartache. And I would love if you would start by talking to us about your stories and how you both made the choice to work toward peace from out of the midst of so much grief and trauma and pain.
Yeah, so I will start. That's the way we usually do it. And usually we also hug at the beginning. But I'm afraid if we'll rise from these chairs and hug it, that's going to be the end of the evening. So dream of us hugging, okay? Dream of us hugging, okay? Yeah.
It starts by age, so Maoz goes first. I thought I had a lot of friends here.
We do have a lot of friends here, and some we meet for the first time on real life, and some that we know for a long time. So I will start that after October 7th and losing both my parents and so many childhood friends and their parents and their family and their children, some were killed, some were kidnapped to Gaza, I start speaking to the world, basically. And at the beginning, I would start my talks or interviews by saying that nothing can prepare you or you or you, nothing can prepare you for such a tragedy. But as I was on my journey to peace and reconciliation, a few weeks after losing my parents, I realized that I was prepared. I was prepared for October 7th. And I guess some of you can imagine who prepared me. My parents. My parents prepared me for the moment of their death. And it's not just me, but my siblings. We are 5 brothers and sisters. And 3 days after October 7th, and the morning of the Shiva, it was the second day of the Shiva, Monday morning, my young brother asked my three sisters and myself to agree on a universal message we're going to deliver to everyone coming to condolence us, and if we speak to anyone afterwards. And he asked us that this message will be that we are seeking no revenge. We don't want to revenge the deaths of our parents because we are locked, we are trapped. I'm using the words of my young brother. We are locked in a cycle of bloodshed, of fear, of hate, of revenge that didn't start 3 days before on October 7th.
Oh, don't worry.
Okay, yeah. That started about a century ago. And by revenging the deaths of our parents, first, we are not going to bring them back to life. And we're just going to escalate this cycle. And he wants that our family will be the one among others to break this cycle, to break the cycle of revenge, of bloodshed. And that night I had a dream. And also I shared it in TED, and I'll share it with you. I was in pain. It was Monday evening, only 3 days after losing my parents. And I was crying in bed, and my entire body was in pain. Yeah. Thank you. And I could see the entire humanity crying with me. We were all crying. And then our tears went down our face and down to our bodies. And our bodies were wounded. Hi, Yuval. Our bodies were wounded from the war. They were burned, they were bleeding. And our tears washed our bodies and healed it. And we become healthy and whole again. And then we kept crying, and my entire body is in such a pain I never experienced before. And then our tears start going down to the ground. And the ground was soaked with blood. You could see only blood on the ground. And then our tears start washing the blood from the earth, purifying the land. And then I could see a path. I could see a path as clear as I can see you here tonight. I could see the path to peace and reconciliation. I woke up and I've decided, in order to heal myself, because for 3 nights and days I was drowning literally, it's not a metaphor, I was drowning in an ocean of sorrow and pain. My body was broken to thousands of pieces. So I've decided, in order to cure myself, to heal myself, I must choose this path. Woke up in the morning, checking my messages, and I see a message on Facebook from Aziz. And Aziz is writing to me that he's standing with me and with my family and sending in his condolences. So I immediately knew that I'm not alone on this path. And I knew that, yes, I lost my parents, but I want a friend, I want a brother, and I want a partner.
It's not fair to let him start, right? I'll start with the question you laid out, Rabbi Brous, is the bigger the opportunity, the crisis, the bigger the opportunity. And in the last year, it wasn't planned this way, but somehow I was in like so many conflict zones this last year and areas that have reached a peace agreement. So I've been to Northern Ireland, I've been to South Africa, I've been to Colombia, I've been to Rwanda, I've been to, just went somehow everywhere that had a big conflict. And in almost all of them, if you've talked to people a couple of years before an agreement has been reached, no one would have believed an agreement would have been reached. In Colombia, where I've worked a lot, people people voted against the peace agreement after it was reached. And they had to rehash it and eventually get the parliament to vote on it. They didn't ask the people anymore. Because okay, people are not there yet. They will eventually support it, but we're gonna have to move despite that. And so And the person who signed it was a former defense minister who was known for being one of the most bloody, awful people when it comes to the history. So there is a lot that comes with this moment of so much pain that can maybe help us to see a light at the end of the tunnel, because it makes us get to the bottom. And for us personally, we have. But I think for our nations, it's not always the same. And usually for people who live outside, even less so. For the diaspora communities, they're the ones who usually don't want to compromise, because you don't feel the same way we have. And I don't mean you personally, but in general for diaspora communities. My story is very similar to Maoz in the sense we both lost family members. I lost my brother when I was 10 years old, and he was 19 years old, Taysir. And when you're 10 years old and you lose your brother, nothing really prepares you for that. So Maoz said his parents prepared him. In my case, I can't say my brother prepared me, although he kind of did very briefly. After he got out of prison, he was pretty much just days before he died. I got in trouble, which I know I look like a good kid, but I used to get in a lot of trouble here and there, and Taysir used to always be the person who comes and helps me in those kind of troubles. And so I have problem in school, I don't tell my parents, I go to my brother, because my parents will always stand against me. My brother wouldn't. And I went to him and I said, some kids stole my marbles. Do kids in America play with marbles? Used to, okay. So if you're too young, I'm sorry, you have no idea what I'm talking about. And I told him, this kid stole my marbles. And the way he used to deal with it, he would tell me, I'm going to go with you and I'm going to make this kid give you back your marbles, which was pretty cool. Except this last time, which was, like I said, a few days before he passed away, he said, I'm going to walk you to the house of that kid and you're going to go knock on that door and you're going to get your marbles back, because I'm not going to be here for you forever. And it took me years to realize that maybe he knew, maybe, I don't know, in hindsight, you can start imagining what these moments mean. But still, after Taysir died, I was pretty angry. I wanted revenge, and that's what I did for the next 8 years, is seeking vengeance. Joined the Fatah youth movement in Jerusalem, was very active there. And I wish in some ways where I did know any Israelis or any Jews. I didn't. The only Israeli Jews I knew were soldiers and settlers. And as nice as a soldier or settler can be, they're still carrying a gun. A soldier can tell you whether you can go to school or not in the morning. And you don't do a dialogue with somebody with a gun and uniform. It's just not it's not an equal relationship as we have here. And when I think of even today, and I think of what happened in Gaza and how many children are orphans and how many children have lost family members, and I think what I went through, and it makes me really wonder what they going through, and it even makes the work we are doing so much more important, because if we are not able to reach these kids, they are exactly where I was. If we are not able to offer hope and vision and something different, they are exactly where I was when I was 10 years old. My transformation happened by meeting Israelis, by meeting Jews who were not soldiers and settlers, who I went to study Hebrew when I was 18 in Ulpan. Anybody knows what Ulpan is? Okay. I'm speaking to a crowd who would know what an Ulpan is. And it was my teacher first, and then the other students who, like Maoz mentioned, in our relationship, my teacher came and made me feel comfortable, and slowly we start talking, getting to know each other, and I was not seen as the other or the enemy, but rather welcomed for who I am, and slowly those relationships transformed me. And I realized that this idea of dividing us between us and them is an absurd concept, that if you have to divide us, it shouldn't be Israeli versus Palestinian, Muslim versus a Jew, Arab versus Israeli. whatever any of these things, but it should be those of us who stand for equality, for justice, for working together, for reconciliation, and those who don't yet. And that's a lot of our work, is not to focus on those who don't, but really trying to highlight those values. And the only way to make it happen is through working with someone who believes in those exact values. And that's where I found Maoz, and we quickly clicked, because a week after October 7th, he was talking about children in Gaza, which I can tell you, there weren't many voices doing that. And I realized, okay, this is somebody we're going to be able to partner together.
Thank you so much.
Ooh. What did I drop? Oh, it's my phone. That's okay.
You know, Ken Burns gave a commencement address at Brandeis, I think it was this past year, that kind of went viral, and he said, all the facts in the world can't change a person's mind. The only thing that can is a good story, right? And so I just want to reflect for both of you, and I'm so sorry that these stories are stories that start in great heartache, but the power of sharing these stories in rooms like this all around the world is so so priceless, because you know, stats and figures and protests and counter protests and Instagram posts. I mean, this is I really feel we're in such a toxic moment, and to just hear you speak, I can't imagine how someone could hear this and it wouldn't change the way that they feel about both the humanity of Israelis and Palestinians, and also about the possibility of peace. So I want to probe this a little bit. There's a text from Avot Rabbi Natan that I want to lift up for a moment. Really interesting story about Aaron, Moses' brother. Aaron was known as a peace builder. And what it says in Avot Rabbi Natan in this text is that when he would walk down the road, if he would see a wicked person, he would just greet them and say shalom to them. He would wish them peace. And so the next day, when the person wanted to go out and commit a sin, he would say, but how can I commit a sin? Because that person sees me as his brother and wants peace for me. It's kind of an amazing story. I'm going to put it, nobody ever does this for secular Israeli Jews, but I did. I gathered some text for you, Maoz. I just happened to have here a text from Bamidbar Rabbah for your plane ride. But greatest peace, because we were just talking about it. So I thought you should have, he said, I heard it says something in the Talmud. So now you have it in your hand. It's actually from the Midrash. And I think you'll find it meaningful. But this is different from what I'm talking about. Go ahead. What are you going to say?
No, but it's, again, I'm using the Bible story many times now. With whom I ever met, I use it. And because that's where I'm coming from. And many people were telling me just after October 7th, and I was telling them, we must make peace now. There is no other way to justify the death of my parents and so many loved ones if we are not going to make peace now. And they told me, how can you talk about peace? How can you talk about peace now? And what my answer was that as a very keen hiker, I was hiking a lot in the desert. And in the desert, it's so hot. And you are thirsty, and you sweat, and you just look for shade, and you cry, you ask, you beg for water. And now, just after losing my parents, I cry, I beg, I ask for peace. It's the most human thing to do. During war is to ask for peace. And there is also one of the Tanaim, Rabbi Yossi Glili, who said, I will say it in Hebrew, and Sharon, you will let me translate. He said, Gadol hu השלום, שבשעת מלחמה אין פותחין אלא בשלום. Peace is so great that in time of war, you should only start with peace, because peace is great. So I promise you I'm going to learn it and going to use it to next, maybe even tomorrow night.
This is the most daring thing that I've ever done rabbinically. hand a somewhat secular Israeli a piece of text. But you got it.
Next, you'll prepare a text for the
Exactly.
Palestinian, then it's even next level.
I wouldn't dare. But what I want to go back for a moment because I think that this connects actually to both of your stories. But so this text from our tradition comes and says that Aaron would grant a blessing of peace even to someone who he knew was not on a path of peace, because being seen as a potential peace builder, as someone worthy of that blessing, actually was enough to transform the person on the road. And I'm thinking about this incredible conversation that I had with Father Greg Boyle about a year ago, and some of you were even in the room. And he was talking about the work that he does at Homeboy Industry. And he said, these two met in that room. Yeah. They met, and this is the beginning of a love story. And he said, and Father Greg Boyle writes and speaks about how at the heart of all addiction and addictive behavior is shame. And so we have to learn how to counter shame if we want to help people overcome addiction. And so I said, well, how do you help people overcome shame? And he said, you look at them like a brother. You look at them like a sister. And you say, you are an image of God. And I see you as a human being with a story just like me. And this is part of what I'm so moved by. And I've heard from so many Palestinians, Aziz, who've come and spoken at IKAR and whom I've met over the years, and when I've been in Israel and traveled through the West Bank. And so many people say the only Israelis or the only Jews that I ever encountered were soldiers and settlers, just like you said, until the Bereaved Families Forum came to my home, until I encountered an Ulpan teacher, until I made some friend by accident while in the United States in a graduate program, right? And there's something about that is actually transformative. And Maoz, for you, that your grief, you had your dream in the midst of your grief, and the dream is kind of concretized by the point of connection to an actual human being and a Palestinian human being who can see you in the depths of your pain as an Israeli Jew. There's something about being seen by the other that ends up affecting a kind of transformation. We see ourselves as worthy of the peace-building project. And I wonder if you can reflect on this for a moment, what it means to continue to fight, to actually see each other in our deepest humanity, precisely at the moment that we are experiencing and maybe even overwhelmed by fear, uncertainty, grief, trauma, rage, anger. I've heard you both talk about anger, and those emotions can be blinding, and yet we know, and prevent us from seeing other human beings. And yet it's only when we see the humanity in one another that we could possibly begin to walk down a path toward peace. Can you reflect on that a little bit?
I think anger is normal. I think in this time, anger, pain, trauma is normal. If you've lost family members, if you know people around you who've been killed, if you have a connection to a place and you see so much suffering, it is normal to have anger. And I think if we tell people don't be angry, they look at us like, you must be out of your mind. And honestly, most won't even listen to anything we have to say. I think the trick is, what do we do with that anger? And whether that anger transforms to be hate and eventually revenge, which is what happens too often, or whether that anger can fuel us to do more to stop the killing, to stop the war, to stop the conflict. And I have a really dear friend who taught me, Ramil Khanan, who taught me that anger is like a nuclear power. And while we might not want nuclear power, it exists. And you can use it then in one of two ways. You either can use it to create a bomb, or you can use it to create electricity. And it's our choice. But if I go to my family, if I go to my friends and say, yeah, don't be angry, as they watching television and they seeing what's going on, they'll be like, you crazy. But when it's about reframing as well what we're doing and saying we connect with the pain, let us think how to use it in a different way. And I would add, empathy is the one emotion that I felt after October 7th was missing from everywhere. It was very difficult because I was talking to Israeli friends and to Palestinian friends who were feeling that the others were not empathetic to them. And I think that's exactly why we needed more people to reach out, like Maoz did to many people, like I did, like a few of our friends have done. It's the emotion that we really need. It's the action that we terribly need still today to show a lot more empathy and expect it less as well. Because if you go around saying, I want you to be empathetic to me, I want you to be empathetic to me, and that's all we're saying is one thing, I think we have to give it, and then it will come back, but we shouldn't expect it. And when I sent Maoz that message, he wasn't the only person I sent it to, although he's my favorite. We didn't know each.
No, I'm his favorite now. I wasn't before.
Back then, by the way, I barely knew Maoz. I met him only once, 10 years before, for about 5 minutes, and we became friends on Facebook, and that's it, which, as we all know, Facebook, for our age at least, is how you become friends. But I didn't know him, and I sent him that message. He responded, but most people I've sent that message to did not respond. And I think not everyone is in the same place. Not everyone is ready for it. But our job as peacemakers is to initiate, and to initiate regardless of what the response is.
I want to come to Maoz in a moment, but I want to think and probe for a moment what it means that you would send a message of condolence to someone and they couldn't even respond, and how actively people have worked to separate ourselves from the humanity of the people who they consider to be on the other side of this conflict. And I mean, we heard very early on, Israeli news stations were showing totally different news than we were seeing here in the United States, right? Every single day, I would open my New York Times and see a horrific image of a Palestinian child or a Palestinian village in rubble. And I would talk to my brother living in Israel, and he was not seeing, he saw it because he looked for international media, but that wasn't on the Israeli TV. So there was an active attempt to disengage from the reality of one another's suffering. And I also know of Palestinians who said that in their community that many Palestinians did not know about or did not believe that October 7th actually happened. And so there's we have to, it's as if to say, if I believe that your pain is real, then it's an act of betrayal against my people and our pain. And what you're saying is exactly the opposite, right? That the way that we honor our own pain is by honoring human suffering. And it doesn't diminish your grief for your parents when you also acknowledge and hold Aziz's grief for his brother. In fact, it only makes you even more human. I think there's something very powerful there.
I'll just add one thing. I think the only regret I would have after October 7th is I did not send that same message to more people. Because at some point you're like, how will people respond? And you keep internalizing that. And the right answer to me today is it doesn't matter how people respond. You do what's right regardless, and this whole separation and division after, it's exactly what you just mentioned. People started believing in their own narrative and their own story and refusing to see the pain and the other, I hate to use that term of other side. It's a horrible terminology, but people forgot that there's a human across the street. And I'll take it back to what I said about Maoz. To me, what was very powerful in Maoz's response is him talking about children in Gaza a week after. That wasn't normal, like no one was talking about it. I also want to say, I made a decision after, even with people I knew, if I knew you've suffered in that period, especially if you've suffered directly, even if you've said awful things online, which many people I knew did, I'm not responding, because you have to give people also time to grieve. And I think too quickly we can judge, and right away polls were going around saying 80% of Israelis want this and 90% of Palestinians want that. And I ignored all of these, because in times of trauma, people lose connection sometimes to reality, and they grieve and they say and do horrible things, and we might want to be a little bit less judgmental and much more embracing in those times.
Yeah. So I have many comments, but I'll try to be brief. So we still got a lot to cover. And I didn't tell you, but I brought the formula how we're going to make peace between Israelis and Palestinians by 2030. Mark my words. By 2030, yes. And we need to we need to get there.
We need to get there. Yeah.
So what I also want to say that not only anger is the legitimate feeling, but also seeking revenge. Seeking revenge is very human. We must acknowledge that, and not think that we are superior to anyone who is seeking revenge or is living his trauma and want to punish those who harmed him. It's very human. We need to acknowledge those feelings. And then we need to offer him an alternative path, an alternative action. And also, this is why it's written, and also in the Jewish tradition, it's very famous. I know it, and I'm a secular Jew. Hashem ikom damam. Only God is allowed to revenge. We human, we are not allowed. We are allowed to reconcile. We are allowed to forgive. We're allowed to be empathy to the other. And when we are taking God power in our hand, we are not going to be punished by the ICC or the Supreme Court. I believe we're going to be punished in the hands of God. And that's something I believe very strongly now. So everyone now in Israel, and the war is 72% of the Jewish Israelis living in Israel believe that one of the reasons for this war is revenge. And this is going to lead us to destruction. Every believer, every Orthodox religious Jew need to know that. But we are blind because of the trauma, because of the pain, because of our anger, and we need to create light. We need to create light so people could see reality, people can reconnect to our faith, and this is what we are doing here.
Beautiful. I actually pulled out a poem that I wanted to share tonight, and when Maoz and Aziz came into my office, they saw the poem on my desk, and they said, "Oh, you have this poem? We like to read this poem in our talks," which is really quite incredible. It's about revenge, and I want to share it with us because I think I learned this from Rana Fahum at Hartman Institute in Jerusalem just a couple of weeks ago, written by Muhammad Ali Taha. And let me quickly.
So maybe the three of us.
Oh, beautiful. Okay.
Let's the three of us read it.
Beautiful.
Usually just the two of us, but I have a small story to say before you start.
Okay, and then we're going to hear about the dream and how we're going to do this in the next 5 years.
But 2 weeks after October 7th, I'm interviewed to a radio station in Nazareth, a Palestinian radio station, and I'm just getting off the air, and I'm getting a call from Usama. He's a friend of mine from Nazareth. And Usama, he tells me, my father, the poet, Taha Muhammad Ali, wrote a poem back in 2006, and now I want to dedicate this poem to you.
Wow.
Yes, because this poem was meant for you. So now I'm honored to read it here.
Who is Taha?
Okay, so Aziz, who is Taha Muhammad Ali?
He's a Palestinian refugee whose village was destroyed in Safuriye and ended up as a refugee in Nazareth. And so his story, this is really connects to his story and not wanting to seek revenge despite what he went through.
This is incredible because I sourced this poem having no idea that you had any connection to this story, so I'm really glad to share it in this way. So I'll read it's a small piece and then hand it to you. At times, he writes, at times I wish I could meet in a duel the man who killed my father and raised our home, expelling me into a narrow country. And if he killed me, I'd rest at last. And if I were ready, I would take my revenge.
But, yeah, I know. But But if it came to light when my rival appeared, that he had a mother waiting for him, or a father who would put his right hand over the heart's place in his chest, whenever his son was late, even by just a quarter hour for a meeting they had set, then I would not kill him, even if I could.
Likewise, I would not murder him if it were soon made clear that he had a brother or sisters who loved him and constantly longed to see him, or if he had a wife to greet him and children who couldn't bear his absence and whom his gifts would thrill, or if he had friends or companions, neighbors he knew, or allies from prison or hospital room, or classmates from his school asking about him and sending him regards.
But if he turned out to be on his own, cut off like a branch from a tree without a mother or father, with neither a brother nor sister, wifeless, without a child, and without kin or neighbors or friends, colleagues or companions, then I'd add not a thing to his pain within that aloneness, not the torment of death and not the sorrow of passing away. Instead, I would be content to ignore him when I passed him by on the street, as I convinced myself that paying him no attention in itself was a kind of revenge. I would only add that I think the two of you would do even more than ignore him on the street. You would reach out a hand to him and bring him in close embrace. And so I really appreciate you speaking so honestly about the desire for revenge, because it's something we don't like to talk about out loud. And I heard Ofri Bibas, the sister of Yarden Bibas, say several times over the course of that terrible week when Kfir and Ariel's bodies came back, but not Shiri's, and she said, "We don't want revenge, we just want Shiri home. We just want Shiri." And I think one of the things that I want to lift up is how different the voices of the hostage families in Israel are than the people who wear hostage tags often here in the United States. Meaning, there is a kind of, from the people like the two of you who are the closest to the pain, there seems to me to be a much deeper recognition of the need to put down arms and find a path not only to ceasefire and deal, but to an enduring peace than there is among many of the people who claim to be the biggest supporters by putting up the imagery of the hostages, but not actually in any way pressing or fighting or speaking out for the kind of hard decisions that would have to be made to really end the war in order for there not to be anyone else who suffers like that. So I'm thinking about Mahalia Jackson. Was that who said during the March on Washington, standing before the Lincoln Memorial, who cried out as Dr. King was giving his address and said, "Tell him about the dream, Martin, tell him about the dream." And that's when he started to tell the I Have a Dream part of the I Have a Dream speech, which was not what he was planning on saying that day. So I want to say to you, Maoz and Aziz, tell us about the dream. Please tell us, and tell us not only about the dream, but about how we're going to achieve this dream and in our lifetime.
Okay, great. So I'll start with a story, okay? I will start with a story that here... Careful. Yes. It's much more difficult than you think it is.
I think you just got older, Maoz, that's all.
Maybe it's the 14 hours flight. So I want to share with you what's within this battle, okay? Because peace is not just possible, peace is easy comparing to what's in this battle. In this battle, it's Israeli sesame oil. And my father, that was the best farmer in Israel, and that's a fact, it's not just something I'm saying. Speak to any Israeli that is in the farming sector, and you tell them the name Yacobi, he'll tell you the best farmer in Israel ever. So my father's partner, who happened to be a classmate of mine, and his professor are going in 2008 to Ethiopia for a field trip to learn about farming in Ethiopia. And they're coming back to Israel, and they share with my father that in Ethiopia, they are cultivating millions of dunam. It's like many, many hectares, okay? Of sesame. And the production is 30 kilo per dunam. Someone help me with the math here.
Dunams are 4 acres. 30 kilo is 60 pounds.
Okay. Which is, it's thank you, Aziz. It's better than I thought. So it's basically nothing, and all those millions of dunams of hectares are being harvested by hand. 10,000s of Ethiopians are going to the field and harvest it by hand. And then Zvika, the professor, Asaf, my father, a partner, and my father start dreaming a dream that humanity was never able to harvest a sesame variety that will produce high production per hectare, that will be, and they will be able to harvest it by a combined harvester. And they had a dream. And then they moved to step 2, is to agree on the values of these dreams. High production, combined harvester, resilience to climate change, high nutrition values, and that they will be able to cultivate it here in Israel, there in Israel. And then they move to the third step, to build a coalition. You cannot fulfill big dreams on your own. You must form a coalition. And then they move to the fourth step, to have a roadmap, a plan. Without a plan, you cannot. Here, Rabbi Sharon, you shared with us the plan for what you're going to build here, okay, for the IKAR community. So you have a plan. So they made a plan, cultivative plan, and they reached from the year 2008, they planned to harvest the dream by the year 2025. And sesame is one of the most important, it's very important for farming globally, okay? It's so big in farming. And then they move to the fifth step, which is execution, because we can have an amazing dream with great values and amazing coalition and a very detailed plan. But if you won't execute your plan, also in 5 years from now, we'll sit here and not in this more beautiful and comfortable community center you're building. So they start executing. And they were ahead of time in a year and a half. 2 weeks after October 7th, for the first time on planet Earth, a sesame variety was harvested by a combine, producing 10 times more per dunam, per hectare, than what they started from. And I will read from the label. And then we're also going to do an experiment. Wow, that's so difficult. Can you? Yeah? Help me. Yes, it's too small for me without the glasses. We are all getting old.
The Yaakov sesame variety was cultivated at Hebrew University's Faculty of Agriculture as a premium high-quality oil variety suited for Israeli farming. This variety is dedicated to the memory of our friend Yaakov Inon, an agronomist, agricultural advisor, worker, and lover of the land, known for his vast knowledge, integrity, and modesty.
Yeah. So this is for you. Yeah. Yeah. And yes, one more. But
Thank you, Maoz.
so
Thank you.
so what we're going to try, I'm going to open it, and you can drop it all and try it, or one drop on your.
Be careful. Last time I did that, I had my clothes with oil, and fortunately it cleaned up.
Yeah.
But
Sharon,
careful.
you say that we can smell, we can taste peace, we can smell, we can taste dream. That's the power of the sesame oil. So we're going to open it and circulate it around.
Can pass it around the room. Great.
Yeah. And we have a dream of peace between Israelis and Palestinians. We are very proud that we have a dream. And we have shared values, a common ground, equality and dignity, shared acknowledgement and recognition, reconciliation and healing, security and safety. Those are our values. And now We are forming a coalition. We are here not just to speak to you. We are here to invite you to be partners within our coalition, because we cannot fulfill big dreams on our own. We have a plan. We have a detailed plan how to achieve peace by the year 2030, and we are already executing. So this is, thank you. Thank you for inviting us. Thanks.
In a couple of minutes, we're going to open it up for a little bit of Q&A, but thank you so much for sharing this with us. Okay. And I love that this is dedicated in the memory of your beloved father. On July 1st of 2024, I landed in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and went straight to the arena. I've spoken about this at IKAR, so some of you have heard me talk about this before, where there was what they were calling a peace confab. So all of the peace organizations in the country, religious and secular, Israeli, Palestinian, came together to engage in this conversation, and it was called Higi Azman, right? It's time. It's time. And it just so happens that Maoz and Aziz were at the forefront of this movement, bringing these folks together. There were 6,000 people packed into the arena, and Israelis and Palestinians stood shoulder to shoulder, including some who had suffered terrible, unimaginable loss, including some who were family members of folks still being held hostage in Gaza, still in the grips of pain, people whose families in Khan Yunis had lost everything, lost entire generations, disappeared, wiped out. And they stood together and said, it's time. And Yuval Noah Harari stood up and he said, folks, we have tried war. It hasn't gone very well for us. Why don't we try peace? Maybe now's the time that we try peace. And I want to really credit the two of you, of course, funded and supported by the New Israel Fund, for this incredible gathering. And as we talked about, it was absolutely transformative to be in the room as this happened. I know you have an even bigger one that's planned for a couple months from now, and maybe you'll tell us about that. But what was so meaningful about it was that there were only 6,000 people there. And some people joked and said, well, those are the only 6,000 people who believe in peace in the entire country. So out of 14 million people, Israelis and Palestinians, you found the 6,000 who think like you do. But actually, it doesn't take a lot of people to change the world. It takes a few people. We can't do it alone, but it doesn't take everybody. And so I wonder if you can just talk about how this dream, this incredibly audacious dream that you fully believe will become a reality and in our lifetime is going to happen. How is this plan going to be executed in the coming days, and what can we as a community here in the diaspora do to help support that unfolding?
You want to start?
I'll start and talk about what we are planning to do, and then you'll take us back of how we got here. I think on the concept that you don't need many people to change reality, that is absolutely true. I think one of the things we get sometimes where people tell us, oh, but are you talking to Hamas? Are you talking to the most radical elements in Israel? And the truth is, I told you I've been to Rwanda, I've been to South Africa, you don't need to focus only on those groups. And I think it's exactly what destroyed almost the peace movement in Israel and Palestine, is this idea that we only need to go and convince the most extreme among us, instead of convince those who are already with us, like everyone in this room. It's not enough to believe, it's important to act on what you believe. Faith alone does not move mountains, right? You need to believe and do something about what you believe in. And that's true in sociology as well. There's tons of studies that shows how revolutions happen. And it shows that 3.5% in a society willing to act daily, not once a month, show up at an event, that is nice. Not only meetings and conference rooms, that is nice, but really people who work day out, day in, saying this is important, this is what I want to change in my own society, in my own community, would transform a society and would change government, would change rules, would change behaviors of a society. But the moment we keep telling people, oh, keep focusing on what's the hardest to do, instead of mobilize us here, the people in this room, to be active every day, that's how we get stopped from achieving what we want to achieve. in the It's Time coalition, there are 60 organizations now. When the last event happened, it was 50, and it keeps growing, and probably 65 by the time we finish this talk. And that's a good news. That is very important, because before October 7th, one of the weaknesses of the peace movement was we are part of one coalition, but we kind of got too distracted, and everyone doing whatever they are doing. And this is not a judgment, this is just a reality of where we were. People in our country have got used to the status quo. Politicians got used to the status quo. And some of us, even in the peace movement, got used to the status quo. And the idea of what we want to do now is to keep showing that there is a movement, there is a group of people who are dedicated, and they'll show up. And so our next event is going to be in Jerusalem. And our goal is to have over 10,000 people. It will be 2 days events where we will do multiple events in different parts of Jerusalem, where it will be different organizations organizing, we'll have events, music, culture, tours, everything you can imagine in Jerusalem will be happening. And then on Friday, the second day, we will have a big gathering where we're expecting the 10,000 people. And the goal is to have Israelis and Palestinians on stage together throughout the whole time, and to show that we are together and not two different sides, not one side and the other side, but rather we are united in one mission.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to send more details. We're going to send you more details regarding the People Peace Summit. That's how we are calling the next event in Jerusalem. And what was happening, I think, on July 1st, and I'll go back, to our holy books. We recreated the Mount Sinai event. While at the biblical event, Moses was on the mountain speaking to God, and the people, the common people, and the leader were dancing around the calf of gold, and that's what's happening now. People are dancing around the calf of war, revenge, hate, and fear. But we were on the mountain. We were 6,000 people on the mountain, Israelis and Palestinians.
Some Americans too.
And some Americans too. And there was some France and then some diplomats. And we embarked on a shared exodus. We embarked on a shared exodus, walking on the path to peace and reconciliation. And like I mentioned that the date when we're going to have peace, by 2030. So this exodus is not going to be 40 years like it was in the Bible. It's going to take us 4 to 6 years. 4 to 6 years to reach the promised land. And this is the same promised land that was promised to Abraham, to Moses, to Jesus, to Muhammad. And it's the same dream that Mahatma Gandhi had, that Dr. King, and Nelson Mandela, where we are all equal, we are all acknowledged, we all live in security and safety. And we're going to reach this promised land. We're going to reach it together.
I know that there's a lot more for us to say, for you to say up here, but I also want to give a few people a chance to ask some questions. And so if you wouldn't mind, we're going to have, Susan has a microphone, and I saw Mark over here first. Thank you.
Can you pick the easy questions first?
So if you wouldn't mind, please stand up and introduce yourself when you ask a question, and keep it very short because we don't have a lot of time.
Hello, I'm Mark Landsman, and I'm a member of IKAR, grateful member. You both, and I'm so sorry for your personal losses. You mentioned Nelson Mandela, and I wonder what role restorative justice plays in your plan for peace.
Aziz is our expert for justice. We just had this talk earlier today.
Yeah, this was our conversation, justice versus restorative justice. I think in every part of those conflict zones I've been to, restorative justice has played extremely important role. I'm thinking Colombia, I just mentioned. The reason people voted no in Colombia in the first referendum is they thought, what, we're not going to put everyone who fought on the other side, in the cartel, in the FLN, those groups, we're not going to make them pay for the murders they committed. No, we will not reward them with peace. That was people's minds, which is, by the way, if you go to Israel and Palestine today, that's literally word by word what you hear. And what Santos has realized, again, the guy who killed more probably FLN and civilians than anybody else in Colombia, has realized it's not rewarding them to get peace, it's rewarding our whole country, our whole society. And that was the restorative justice element there. They actually paid the former militias to get out of the militia, get new training on jobs, and give them a normal life, which not everyone was ready for it, but that was so instrumental in making change. I think of Rwanda and how everyone even the international community thought you need to set up courts, and everyone who was involved in the genocide need to be basically held fully accountable for it, which per the government in Rwanda, they realize if we do that, we're going to commit a second genocide. And how do you deal with it? And they decided to connect to their own roots of conflict resolution practices. By the way, with all due respect, as somebody who's worked in many conflict zones, Western conflict resolution practices are not the only ones that are legit. They're not. And Rwanda, like many African countries, just like South Africa, has their own history of their own practices of conflict resolution, and they use their own conflict resolution practices in different communities, and that worked, where today you can go to Rwanda and meet, like this, I've been there with the genocide memorial, and you'll meet people like this woman who, her whole family was killed by their neighbor. He raped her, gave her HIV, and today they're reconciled. Not only they're reconciled, he's the person who comes and picks her up every morning to take her to work. And it's what I learned there, because I responded like you, I can't comprehend that. And what I learned from it, what the people there told me, every one of us can be a killer. With the right misinformation or disinformation, with the right kind of conditions, we can all be killers. We can all be murderers. But also, every one of us can be a peacemaker. And with the right conditions and with the right atmosphere that we create, every one of us can be a peacemaker. And that's the role of restorative justice.
Maybe not.
Okay. Susan, I see making your way, and then.
Hi, Adam Gross. Very nice to be here. How do you balance your visions and commitment to peace above everything, with, how could you have made peace with the Nazi regime? How could you have made peace with ISIS? Yossi Klein-Halevi and Daniil Hartman have talked a lot about the moral necessity, the moral justness of just war, and how that is, in a way, a path towards peace. So how do you balance the sometimes necessity for war against the enemies of peace with peace, nonviolence, etc.?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I will take it. So I'm going back to my Jewish heritage. But it's not just Jewish, it's also Muslim and Christian, because Prophet Jonah is a prophet in all monotheistic religion. And Prophet Jonah was sent by God to bring the city of Nineveh to the right way. The entire city were Nazis. The entire city were sinners. It was a city of sinners. Murderers. And Jonah is telling God, I don't want to do it. Destroy the city. And he refused, and he is running away from God, is drowning in the ocean, being eaten by a whale. and 3 days of transformation. And then he say, okay, I'm going to take this God mission. And he's going to preach to the city of sinners, of murderers. And he's succeeding in God's mission. He's converting the entire people as individual, but as a community. And this story, Bible story, shows us the potential in each one of us to be transformed. And I believe in this potential. And we need to cultivate this potential. We need to say hello, like Prophet Aaron was saying on the streets. We need to look to the monster in the eye, not to behead it, not to bomb it, not to build a wall between us to the monster. We need to start dialoguing with the monster, to learn about our own trauma. And we always using the Greek mythology of the monster Medusa. Medusa wasn't born a monster. She was born a beautiful Greek baby, a girl and a lady. And then she was raped. She was raped in Athens temple. Her trauma wasn't treated. Her trauma wasn't healed. The contrary, she was cursed. And then she became a monster. But if we start dialoguing with her, hearing, listening to her trauma, to her stories, we start humanizing her. And more important, we start humanizing ourselves. And that's the key. That's the key to be transformed and to help others be transformed.
I'm just going to draw us back for a moment, and you can hand the mic for the next question, to something, Aziz, that you said earlier about how sometimes it's even harder for people who are a little bit further away to contemplate the reality of peace. And I feel that in the question and in the answer here. I think for many of us to hear you speak that way, I even feel in my own body a kind of natural response to that, like, but isn't it sometimes, aren't we, you know, and like, is loving the person who hurts you really the way to make peace, or do we sometimes need to protect ourselves so we don't all die, right? And I think I'm just really humbled by what it means, and for the two of you to be the ones who are embodying this message, and inviting us to change the paradigm, to shift the paradigm, because we have tried war as the answer, and we have tried revenge as the answer, and I think what you're offering us is something that's really counterintuitive and really counternormative. Yeah. And for that reason, I'm grateful for the question, and I'm grateful for the answer, and I want for us to sit and struggle with that answer.
I'll like to add a couple of sentences to that. One, I've worked in areas where in my work we've negotiated, or people I've worked with negotiated with Taliban and with ISIS. And I think despite what you hear in American news, those negotiations did happen, and in some cases were actually successful. It doesn't mean we got the best outcomes. But when it comes to Israel and Palestine, I actually believe the only way we can beat extremism is doing the opposite of what we're doing now. Because Netanyahu and his government feed on Hamas, and Hamas feeds significantly on Netanyahu's government. And if you look at Gaza today, every person who was killed in Hamas has been replaced. Because as there's more pain, more people join. And Ben Gvir today is if there's an election in Likud tomorrow, he could win to be the head of Likud. So they feed on each other. So how do you fight it? You either can fight it by saying we continue war and more killing and one day we'll achieve it. I don't believe that's going to happen. However, we destroy extremism by creating an alternative. And showing people that there is a different path for the future. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. And in the last year, the two of us have done so many, and obviously not just the two of us, our team, which some of them are here, like Dindi and like Susan in the back, and you know,
Paula.
And Rabbi Paula, and we don't pay Rabbi Paula, but yes. It's the other way around. Rabbi Paula pays us. But I think that team is able to create projects and activities and meetings and talks, and there's many things we are working on that able to create that alternative. And I think the more, and I've seen people like me, you could have looked at me when I was 15 years old and said, there's no hope for this kid. He's active with the Fatah youth, he hates Israelis, he hates Jews. We can't give up, I think, on people.
My question is
Will you
to
introduce
Aziz.
yourself?
My question is to Aziz. I just want to say before it that I was born in IKAR, and I spoke Arabic in the shuk, and I had great relationship of Jews and Arabs. The problem is not the people, it's those who want to divide us. But I'm curious because you strike on an idea that I was not, nobody is talking about it in the news because it's too neutral. You mentioned going to conflict areas and learning. How did they do it? That's an amazing question. And to double this question is with the issue of education, because I've not seen just the brainwash education on the Palestinian side. To my shock, I saw it on the Israeli side, and I said, it takes two to tango, you know, they are all feeding on each other, and it's really crazy. So
Thank
share
you.
with us, please.
Thank you.
You want us to dance tango here on the stage?
You can take that tango. I'll say a couple of things, and Maoz, I'm sure you'll have stuff to add. One,
I thought it was an alarm. I was like, okay, we'll go to the shelter.
no. You're reminding me of a story that I can't share. But I think on the different conflicts, it is really important to learn. And one thing I'm very grateful for is I took the time to go to different conflict zones, work in different conflict zones, and it's much easier when you're not directly, suddenly you're able to see things you don't see when you are directly involved. One project that we are doing with colleagues of mine is we're actually doing a film right now where we're taking 3 Israelis, 3 Palestinians, and we different project. We going to Northern Ireland and we filming in Northern Ireland the people who worked on the peace deal, and including people who killed, people who were in prison, people who had family members killed and lobbied for peace or against peace. And we talking to them to learn about their own experience, but we're also filming ourselves responding to it. And we're trying to see, and all 6 of us are pro-peace, and still, there are moments that are very difficult. In the last filming trip we did, every day, every one of us cried. Every day. It was the most emotional thing. So that's on the learning. Next year, the film will be out, and then we'll come back to screen it here. And maybe we'll get as lucky as Avram, Yoval, and Basil and get an Oscar. Maybe. I can dream. But on your second question on education, one project we've been working on the last year is creating an online resource center. It's right now online, and the hope is to make it physical. We were dreaming again of doing one in Nazareth. And the online center we create is called Dual Narrative Online Education Center. It's dualnarrative.org. Feel free to look it up. Actually, we have information and code, whatever they call them. That's QR. Thank you. You're older. You're not supposed to know this stuff. And in it, the Dual Narrative Education Center, the goal of it is to get Israelis, Palestinians, and internationals to hear what they don't know. So if you're an Israeli, you don't go there to hear the Israeli narrative. You go to hear the Palestinian narrative. And if you're Palestinian, you go to hear the Israeli narrative. If you're international, you probably need both. And we're still in the beginning. This is a big project that the big dream is to make it literally a museum kind of place. But it's extremely needed because of what you just mentioned, is in schools, people are not learning who their neighbors are. and have zero contact with people who live right across the street from them. I would argue not even Israeli Palestinian, even you talking about within the Israeli society and within the Palestinian society.
I'm gonna ask one last question, and then I want to close with just a couple of thoughts as we wrap up tonight. Aziz and Maoz, when we were talking earlier this evening, we were talking about the power of actually sharing the vision, saying the words, the dream, and I told you about my friend whose family fled Iran, a Muslim family that fled Iran, who talks about the smells of Tehran and the sounds and the images once the peace comes, and what kind of art will be created there, and what the music and the playing in the streets. And you shared this very powerful image about your father and Germany and the car. Or was it?
It wasn't my father.
It's not your father. Okay. But
my father too, but not Germany.
Will you just share this, because I feel I want to just give people something that they can hold on to as we leave that really gives us an image of what the world could actually look like in not the far distant future if we're able to pursue this path.
First thing I did when I got my American citizenship, and this is true, I went to Lebanon because I couldn't go before, and American passport, go to Lebanon. And in Lebanon, I took a taxi, and it was the oldest car you can find. It was a Mercedes 1960. It was beautiful, and it looked brand new. This guy took care of his Mercedes really well. And he told me, when I asked him, where did you get this car? He said, I went to Germany, and I bought the car, and I drove it back. And for somebody like me, I was like, this is impossible. How did you drive it back? And he explained to me that back in 1960, you actually could do that. And so when we talk about dreaming, we want to make the Middle East great again.
I'm sure we can find a better way to say that.
Those borders. So my dad, you mentioned my dad tells me stories of his car breaking down and him taking the bus to Istanbul to go buy the right pieces for his car, and then taking the bus back because Istanbul isn't that far from Jerusalem. And so this is history, but it is the future that we have to look forward to, a future where Israelis and Palestinians can travel to Qatar or to Baghdad or to Cairo or to Beirut or to Istanbul and not have to worry about checkpoints, not have to worry about safety, not have to worry about any of that. And if it was possible 60 years ago, 100 years ago, it can be possible again.
No, thank you. No one asked about what is our roadmap, what is our plan. So I want to share with you, okay, the 5 chapters of our plan. We use 5. We have time for 5. So the first chapter is to dream. Dream with us. And what we will, bless you. Okay. Bless with, it's good luck. So what we realized is that the field where we can change humanity is not the battlefields or the political field, it's the field of dreams. So we decided to position ourselves in this field, and we have a dream. And the second chapter is to amplify our dream. We must, on stages, social media, it can be flyers everywhere, conventions, summits, amplify the dream. The third chapter is to build legitimacy to the dream. Peace is the most rational action to do now. It's peace. Those who believe that bombs will bring quiet, that war will defend, that war will create security, they've been failing again and again and again. Only peace can bring security and safety. The fourth chapter is change policy from tools of destruction, which is basically the only thing the US and other countries are sending to the region at the moment, to send us tools of construction, of reconciliation, of healing. And the fifth chapter is to build a political will. And I'm saying a political will because 16 months after the October 73 October War, no one could predict or imagine that it will be Begin that will make peace with Israeli biggest enemy. Okay, no one could believe it. And what Aziz and I are, those are the actions that we are doing. And Aziz and I also established our own organization, which is called Interact. There are leaflets here at the table there. And we are initiating several programs, the dual narrative educational schools, scholarship for students, speaker bureau to bring more speakers to speak about peace and reconciliation. So we are doing a lot on our side. And what we want you to think after this evening, think what can you do? What can each one of you do to make peace between Israelis and Palestinians? And one of the things you can do, help us. help us, sponsor our project, sponsor It's Time Coalition. We are among the leaders, we are in the steering committee, we're investing so much money, but we also need to make a living and we need to pay our team and to scale ourselves. So if the smallest thing you can do is to sponsor us, but you can do many more other things. And last thing, I also told you that my mom prepared me. So 8 years ago, my mom was a mandala painter, and her studio was miraculously saved. Our wooden house was burned to ashes. It was only 200 meters, less than quarter a mile from the border. It was burned to ashes, and the wooden deck leading from the house to the studio was burned, and the fire stopped at the studio. And 8 years ago, I co-founded the Abraham Hostels, and I managed the one in Tel Aviv. And she gave me this blessing, this mandala. And I'll read it in Hebrew, and then in English. כל החלומות שלנו יכולים להתגשם אם יהיה לנו האומץ לרדוף אחריהם. All our dreams can be fulfilled if we have the courage to chase them. Thank you. There are many more at the table. You can pick one postcard.
We're going to close. I want to just lift up a couple of the themes that I have heard from this evening, knowing that this is an unfinished conversation, and hopefully we'll get the chance to continue for the next 5 years until there's peace, and then we won't need to anymore. We'll just eat ice cream. So what I want to lift up is, first and most importantly, I think, is humanity. That you've said that the most extreme voices among Israelis and Palestinians absolutely fuel each other. And I think for those of us who don't identify with those voices, we feel increasingly powerless because they're so loud, they're so dominant. And what we can do and what we must do is continue to affirm and engage and lift up one another's humanity and our own. And that's something we absolutely must do in these days. And, you know, over the course of the last 16 months, there were people who said, I can't come to IKAR anymore. I can't hear you say the words Palestinian and civilian anymore because we're at war and look what they did to us. And I've had people who've said, I can't come to IKAR anymore because you keep talking about the hostages, and the hostages is a justification for war. And you know, we're going to keep saying hostages, and we're going to keep saying Palestinian civilians, and we're going to keep talking about humanity in these places in small pockets all around the world. That is the case. We will refuse to allow the extremists to dictate the contours of our hearts and of our conversations. And thank you for the reminder of how absolutely essential that is. The second thing is, I want to remind us that we get to choose which stories we tell. And this is one of the stories that we're choosing to tell tonight, that every one of you chose to come here on a Monday night and hear these stories. Again, not because they represent the overwhelming majority of Israelis or Palestinians, but because they exist in the world and because they matter and because there's something about each one of us that needs to hear these stories so that we can find the fuel that we need to continue to believe that a different kind of future is possible. And so I hope that, and bless all of us, that we continue to choose wisely in the stories. Every single day there are terrible stories to tell about what's going on in the world, and we have to be honest about what's happening, and we also have to tell the stories about the people who are being brave enough to counter those narratives with different narratives. Hope. You have become famous for this line, hope is a verb. And I want to remind us that hope is a choice, that hope is a verb, that the way that we find hope is by doing the work. We don't expect to wake up and feel hope. We have to make hope happen, each one of us, every single day, through acts of courage and commitment, like you've said. And finally, I'm just a last acknowledgement of, in this time of so much uncertainty and fear, that trauma and fear and uncertainty and even deep personal grief do not need to lead us down the path of revenge, the path of violence, the path of extremism, and the path of eternal war. There is another way. We can all choose another way, and the fact that the two of you have is an incredible blessing, not only for each of you in your lives, but for all of us, because it shows us what's possible. So I really bless you that your brother's memory is always a blessing, that your parents' memory are always a blessing in this world, and that together you continue to find great strength in this beautiful partnership and friendship, and you continue to shine this beautiful light together that is truly inspiring thousands, millions of people all around the world. May we all meet in Jerusalem in the year 2030 to celebrate the great peace that has come.
Yes.
There are lots of great local peace builders in this place right now. So please find each other in this room, get to know each other, share information with each other, and we'll see you all again soon, God willing.